On the cold night of February 24th, 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City, California, all close friends, all devoted basketball fans, climbed into a white 1950 Mercury Montego and drove north toward the small college town of Chico. They were there for a simple reason: to watch a basketball game. None of them could have known that within hours they'd vanish into one of the strangest missing persons mysteries in American history. A case so bizarre that investigators decades later still call it the American Dyatlov Pass. The 5 men were Ted Wire, Jack Hewitt, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Gary Mathias. They were known locally as the Boys. All of them lived with their families. All held jobs or attended programs for adults with mild intellectual disabilities. And all shared a deep bond through sports, especially basketball. That Friday evening, they piled into Madruga's car to attend a game between UC Davis and Chico State. It was supposed to be a short trip, 50 miles there, 50 miles back. They promised their parents they'd return right after. The next morning, they had a game of their own to play, the Special Olympics qualifying tournament, and every one of them had laid out their uniforms the night before, but they never came home. When the families awoke the next morning and found empty beds, uneaten breakfasts, and unclaimed uniforms, panic spread quickly. By afternoon, police departments across multiple counties were on alert. Witnesses in Chico confirmed that the men had attended the game. They'd cheered, laughed, bought snacks, and left together around 10 p.m. Nothing unusual. Then came the first strange clue. 2 days later, a forest ranger spotted a car half buried in snow on a remote mountain road near Oroville, about 70 miles from Chico, far east of the route they should have taken home. It was Madruga's Mercury Montego. The doors were unlocked. A window was rolled down. The keys were gone. But the car itself? Perfectly operable. The gas tank was a quarter full. The tires were fine. The engine had no issues. It hadn't gotten stuck. It had been abandoned. Inside, investigators found a few candy wrappers, a few folded programs from the basketball game, and maps of California neatly placed in the glove box. No sign of a struggle, no sign of panic. Outside, snow covered everything. Temperatures that night had dropped below freezing. Searchers fanned out, calling the men's names through the woods. Nothing answered but the wind. Weeks passed, snow melted, still no trace. Then, in early June, 4 months after their disappearance, a forestry worker inspecting a remote trailer deep in the Plumas National Forest made a horrifying discovery. He opened the door and froze. Inside, lying neatly on a bed, covered with 8 sheets tucked tightly around his body, was Ted Wire. His beard had grown nearly an inch, suggesting he had survived for almost 3 months after the others vanished. On a nearby table were neatly stacked cans of rations, enough food for several men for weeks, but most were untouched. In a cabinet, a locker held heavy clothing and matches. The propane tank outside was full. He could have lit the heater. He could have opened the cans. He could have survived, but he hadn't. His feet were frostbitten. His body weighed just over 100 pounds. His watch had stopped on an unknown day. Soon after, searchers found more remains scattered along the snowmelt routes between the car and the trailer. Bones, torn clothing, pieces of what once were 4 friends, Sterling, Madruga, and Hewitt among them. Only Gary Mathias, the 5th, was never found. His shoes were discovered inside the trailer, as if he'd lent them to Wire before going out into the blizzard. It made no sense. Why had they driven so far into the mountains, 70 miles off their route, up an unlit, snow-covered road in the middle of the night? Why abandon a working car to trek 20 miles uphill through freezing conditions with no survival gear? Why reach a trailer stocked with food, clothing, and fuel only to die as though waiting for help that never came. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the puzzle became. Some witnesses recalled seeing them in small mountain towns after the game, dazed or seemingly following someone. Others reported a loud noise and flickering lights in the sky the night they disappeared. And then there was the trailer itself, an old U.S. Forest Service cabin used for emergency shelter. The windows were broken from the inside. Something, or someone, had terrified them enough to make escape impossible. The Yuba County 5 case remains open. Officially, the men succumbed to exposure, disoriented by snow and cold. Unofficially, it stands as one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in American history. A story of friendship, fear, and a night that began with laughter but ended in silence among the pines. And somewhere out there in the dark ridges above Oroville, the truth may still lie buried beneath the soil, waiting like the snow that once covered their footprints to melt away and reveal what really happened on that mountain road. When investigators retraced the last known movements of the Yuba County 5, the first question everyone asked was simple: why that road? The car had been found on a remote snow-covered track cutting deep through the Sierra Nevada foothills, far from any logical route between Chico and Yuba City. It led east, climbing into the Plumas National Forest, where in February the temperatures drop below freezing and the roads are often impassable. There was no reason for the boys to be there, no known friends, no destinations, no planned stops. Yet the car, Jack Madruga's beloved Mercury Montego, had traveled almost 70 miles along winding mountain paths before coming to rest at 4,400 feet elevation, and it hadn't been forced off the road. No tire tracks showed panic or skidding. It had been parked carefully. The locals knew the area well. It was wilderness, empty logging country, steep hills, and black ice. Hunters and rangers avoided it at night. To drive there in February, after dark, without proper winter clothing or supplies, was almost suicidal. So what could have lured them there? One theory emerged early on. Someone guided them. A gas station attendant from a small town along the route swore he'd seen the group around 11 p.m. 5 men in a white car, stopping briefly, looking confused. Another witness claimed to have seen them in the company of a man with a beard, someone none of their families recognized. Then there was Joseph Shones, a local who would later become the case's most controversial witness. That same night, around 11:30 p.m., Shones had been driving his Volkswagen Beetle up that very road when his car got stuck in the snow. While trying to free it, he suffered a mild heart attack. He crawled back inside to rest and keep warm. Hours later, just after midnight, he was awakened by voices outside his car. Through the snow-covered windshield, he claimed he saw a group of men and a woman holding a baby standing behind a flickering flashlight. They seemed to be talking among themselves. Shones called out for help. The light went out. The voices stopped. Then, silence. Hours later, he saw flashlights again, further down the road. But when dawn came and a snowplow finally reached him, there was no sign of anyone. At first, police dismissed his story as delirium brought on by pain and cold. But when they discovered the Yuba County 5's car abandoned less than 50 yards from where Shones had been stranded that night, his words suddenly carried weight. Had he seen the 5 men alive? And who was the woman and child? Investigators began piecing together a map of the group's last hours. The journey from Chico to the Oroville Mountains wasn't random. Several turns, several forks, and still no wrong turns logged. They had stayed on a coherent path, suggesting intent or guidance. The men would have reached the point where the car was found around midnight. The Montego stopped just short of a snowdrift, high enough to block progress but shallow enough to walk through. If they had tried, the car could have passed easily, but they didn't even attempt it. Instead, they abandoned it. Inside, the keys were missing, and one window was rolled down. Strange for a freezing night. The gas gauge showed a quarter tank, and the battery still had power. The police tested the car later. It started instantly. Whoever left it there chose to leave it. From that point, all 5 had walked away on foot, into the forest, in total darkness. The road wound uphill through knee-deep snow, miles from any house or structure. None of them were dressed for cold weather. Some wore light jackets, others only shirts. It was as if they expected to find something close by, a house, a friend, a meeting point. But there was nothing. Over the next 19 miles, the trail they left behind would become a haunting breadcrumb path of confusion and endurance. Snack wrappers, a single tennis shoe, a pack of matches. Somewhere along that mountain, they separated. Whether by choice or by panic, no one knows. What's certain is that one of them, Ted Wire, survived long enough to find shelter in the trailer deep in the woods. How he got there remains a mystery. The path would have been nearly impossible to find in daylight, let alone in a snowstorm. And yet, he made it. Someone did. There's a moment in the police report that chills every reader. Inside the trailer, investigators found Matthias's sneakers placed beside Wire's body. It suggested that Gary, the most physically fit and street-smart of the group, had gone for help, leaving his shoes for his friend. But he never came back. No trace of Gary Matthias has ever been found. Not his body, not his belongings, nothing. The official line says, misadventure, that they panicked, got lost, and succumbed to cold. But nothing about this case feels accidental. 5 men devoted to routine, careful and kind, drove into the mountains for no reason, abandoned a working car, split up, and vanished. There's an unspoken detail that haunts the surviving families. Every man's watch stopped at a different time, but each one between midnight and dawn. Whatever happened up there, it happened quickly. And if Joseph Shones truly saw those figures that night, then the Yuba County 5 weren't alone on that mountain road. Morning broke cold and merciless over the Sierra Nevada foothills. The search began with optimism. 5 young men surely lost, perhaps huddled somewhere waiting for daylight. The authorities at first treated it like a rescue mission, not an investigation. But as the first week passed and the temperatures fell each night below 0, that optimism turned to something darker. The car had been found. The footprints were there, but where had they gone? The snow line, that invisible boundary between safety and silence, stretched high above the Feather River that February. Rangers knew that once you crossed it unprepared, the mountain could erase you. Snow drifts swallowed entire vehicles. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Still, the men had walked directly into it. Investigators traced their tracks for a short distance before they vanished beneath fresh snowfall. What they found in those first few miles offered more confusion than clarity. A crumpled program from the Chico basketball game, the last known event they'd attended, a half-empty pack of Winston cigarettes, a single chocolate wrapper, the kind the group loved to snack on during drives. But no sign of struggle, no footprints leading off the road, just a vanishing trail that ended abruptly where the storm had started. The rescue operation grew massive. Helicopters scanned the forests. Snowmobiles carved through the white wilderness. Volunteers from Yuba and Plumas counties joined, calling out names into the frozen silence. Jack! Bill! Gary! The mountain never answered. Local hunters warned that the region was full of abandoned cabins, old Forest Service trailers, and half-collapsed shelters from logging operations decades earlier. They advised searchers to look there, not for life, but for clues. For weeks, the only thing they found was snow and despair. Meanwhile, families refused to give up hope. Ted Wyer's mother set out every morning to call local stations, pleading for information. Jack Madruga's family printed flyers and drove the highways for hours. They even hung signs on mountain roads that read, "Boys, stay put." Help is coming. Gary Mathias's stepfather organized his own search, convinced that his son, a military veteran, was still alive. "Gary knows survival," he said. "He'd help the others." He wouldn't just vanish, but as March turned to April, the forest remained silent. Then came the thaw. May 1978, more than 3 months after the disappearance. As the snow began to melt, a small group of motorcyclists riding through the forest caught the faint smell of decay. Following it, they stumbled upon a sight that would haunt them for life: a trailer. Old, abandoned, but with signs of use. Inside, beneath a pile of blankets, lay the body of Theodore "Ted" Wyer. He was stretched out on a bunk, emaciated, with his beard grown long, at least 13 weeks of growth, and around him, evidence of something incomprehensible. There were 12 unopened cans of sea rations, Army surplus food, easily edible, stacked neatly on a shelf. A large propane tank sat outside, untouched, though it could have provided heat. Beside Ted, a partially melted candle and a few sheets pulled from the walls for insulation. But most chilling of all, next to his body, investigators found a notebook. On one of the final pages, in shaking handwriting, were the words, "Gary, I've had enough." No date, no context, only silence. The coroner ruled Wyer had died from starvation and hypothermia. Despite having everything he needed to survive, he had lost nearly 100 pounds. His feet were badly frostbitten. He hadn't been alone. Inside the trailer, searchers discovered Gary Mathias's sneakers, placed carefully beside Wyer's body. Ted's own shoes were missing. Someone had swapped them. This single clue ignited decades of speculation. Why would Mathias, the only one strong enough to travel, leave his shoes and vanish into the woods? A mile away, searchers found 3 more bodies: Jack Hewitt, Bill Sterling, and Jack Madruga, lying along a trail leading toward the trailer, as if they had tried to reach it but collapsed one by one in the snow. Their positions told a story of desperation. One had wrapped himself in forest debris for warmth. Another lay face down in the brush. They had died trying to find shelter, just short of safety. That left one name unaccounted for: Gary Mathias. His shoes were there. His friends were not. The search expanded once more, this time focused on finding him, or what might remain. They combed rivers, ravines, and mine shafts. But Gary was gone. To this day, no trace has ever been found. The discovery of the trailer transformed the Yuba County Five from a missing persons case into one of America's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Why abandon a working car? Why ignore food, heat, and supplies? Who led them into the mountains? And what did Wyer mean in that final note to Gary? Some locals whisper about the woman and baby seen by Joseph Shones, that maybe Gary had been with someone else. Others suggest military involvement, hidden experiments at nearby bases, or even a survivalist cult. No theory fits perfectly. All that's known for sure is this: 5 young men entered the mountains that night, and only one ever walked out. By June of 1978, the Sierra had surrendered nearly all its secrets, except one. 4 bodies lay accounted for. One man, Gary Mathias, remained missing, and with his absence came the single thread that kept the mystery alive: the unanswered why. Sheriff's deputies searched until the forest floor turned green again, but Mathias had simply vanished. No body, no bones, no clothing, just his sneakers by Wyer's bunk, a single pair of footprints once seen in melting snow, and 1,000 questions that spiraled into something stranger than logic. Gary Mathias had always been the wild card of the group, intelligent, unpredictable, but not reckless. A veteran of the U.S. Army, he'd served in Germany before being discharged for mental health issues. He was known to struggle with schizophrenia, sometimes triggered by stress or substance use. But those who knew him said he had been stable for nearly 2 years before the disappearance, living at home, taking his medication, and playing basketball with his friends. The same friends who would later die on that frozen mountain. In the eyes of investigators, Matthias's background made him both a key suspect and a tragic victim. If he had a breakdown, did he lead them astray? If not, did he survive while the others froze to death, vanishing into the wilderness? One theory suggested Gary had wandered back down the mountain after fire died, possibly trying to find help. But the area was extensively searched by dozens of teams, cadaver dogs, and even the National Guard. Nothing, not a scrap of fabric, not a bone fragment, was ever found. Locals began to weave darker explanations. Some claimed Gary had returned home secretly, that he was sighted in Sacramento months later, unkempt and silent. Others swore they saw him in Marysville, walking barefoot near the river, eyes vacant like he was somewhere else entirely. Every sighting was unverified. Every rumor made the story murkier. Then there was the Shones encounter, still unexplained. The night the men vanished, a local named Joseph Shones had been trapped in his car near the same mountain road after suffering a mild heart attack. Around midnight, he claimed to have seen a group of men, a woman and a baby walking in the snow, their headlights flickering behind them. He shouted for help, and the group turned toward him. But moments later, they vanished into the storm. He later insisted one of the men matched Gary Matthias's description. If Shones was right, then Gary wasn't just with his friends that night. He was with someone else. When investigators returned to Gary's home in Marysville, they found his life frozen in time. His glasses on the nightstand, his Army discharge papers folded neatly, his favorite jacket, the same one he wore the night he disappeared, was missing. There were no signs he'd planned to leave, no note, no secret correspondence. But there was one chilling detail. Gary had a history of wandering off during mental episodes, sometimes walking long distances with no memory afterward. In one instance, years earlier, he had been found miles from home, barefoot and confused, unable to explain how he got there. Could that have happened again? Only this time in a blizzard? Or had something else taken him long before the snow began to fall? For the families, closure never came. Ted Wyer's mother said she often dreamed of Gary knocking at her door, thin and frostbitten, asking for forgiveness. Jack Madruga's brother believed Gary might have turned violent, that he led the others into the mountains and snapped when they tried to leave. Gary's stepfather refused to believe any of it. He loved those boys, he said. If he was alive, he'd have come back. But what haunts most who study the case isn't what happened after. It's what happened before. The night of February 24th, 1978, was meant to be nothing more than a simple drive home after a basketball game. Yet something, or someone, diverted the Yuba County 570 miles off route into one of the most dangerous regions of Northern California. It wasn't a shortcut, it wasn't a mistake. Someone made a decision that night. The gas in their car proved they'd driven deep into the wilderness intentionally. And the way the vehicle was found, not stuck, not broken, just abandoned, suggested panic, not accident. Something had scared them. The official reports would later call it misadventure. But to the families, it was a cover story, a way to close a case no one could explain. In the years since, the Yuba County Five has become a kind of American myth, whispered about on message boards, analyzed by armchair detectives, dissected by psychologists and conspiracy theorists alike. Some say Gary Matthias encountered something, or someone, on that road. Others believe they stumbled onto a secret military operation, or perhaps a hidden drug route, and paid the price for seeing what they shouldn't have. And yet, there's a simpler possibility that 5 friends, lost in the dark, followed the wrong leader into a night that never ended. But then again, how do you explain the footprints that stopped mid-trail? The untouched food, the missing shoes, the single note, "Gary, I've had enough." Every answer opens a new question. Every theory leads back to one man, the one who was never found. Time, they say, buries all mysteries, but in the mountains above Yuba County, the echoes never stopped. Even decades later, hikers still whisper of strange shapes in the snow, distant cries carried on the wind, and lights that flicker through the pine trees long after midnight, as if the mountain itself remembers what happened to those 5 boys who never came home. By the summer of 1978, the official investigation had gone cold. 4 funerals had been held, and Gary Mathias, the missing 5th, had become a ghost. Yet for those who studied the evidence, the story refused to end neatly. There were too many contradictions, too many signs that something else had been at work, something neither natural nor logical. For starters, the condition of Ted Wyer's body puzzled every investigator. He had survived up to 13 weeks, meaning he was alive for months after the others died. The food in the trailer, the missing sheets, the candle, all pointed to slow, deliberate survival. But there was no record of fire being lit, no signs of effort to melt snow for water. Ted had apparently rationed food but failed to use any of the life-saving tools surrounding him. Why? Some said he was too weak, others believed he wasn't alone. The theory, Gary Mathias had been there, tending to Ted, sharing food, before leaving to find help. His sneakers by the bed were the silent proof. But if Gary had left, where did he go? Weeks after the final search ended, a forest ranger named Bill Cox reported something strange near a ravine 2 miles from the trailer. He'd found what looked like an impression of a body in the ground, as if someone had once lain there for a long time, covered in snow and later thawed out by spring. But when the site was examined, there was nothing left. No bones, no clothes, just that eerie hollow in the earth like a missing puzzle piece. Some said it was Gary's final resting place. Others swore it wasn't a grave, but a mark left by something heavier, something dragged. Over the years, new theories surfaced, each darker than the last. One came from a retired deputy who claimed that the men had stumbled onto an illegal drug drop in the mountains, possibly linked to a smuggling operation using the back roads near Oroville and Forbestown. If they'd witnessed something they shouldn't have, they might have been chased or threatened, forcing them into the forest. But that didn't explain the untouched car, the lack of struggle, or why the men would separate instead of sticking together. Then there was the military theory. Locals knew that several Air Force communications sites and Cold War listening posts dotted the Sierra Nevada in the 1970s, fenced off, hidden deep within the woods. Some claimed the group had accidentally approached one that night, and armed personnel had confronted them. No official report supports this, of course, but the region was, and still is, home to quiet facilities known only by code names, the kind that don't show up on maps. If the 5 men had driven near one of those sites, the consequences might have been swift and unrecorded. There's also something deeper, harder to explain, the sense that the mountain itself was complicit. In local folklore, that stretch of the Plumas National Forest is called the Silent Pass. Old logging families used to say, the air there forgets voices, and that you could shout for hours and never hear an echo. Hunters went missing there long before 1978, and not all of them were found. Ted's note, "Gary, I've had enough," reads differently when you imagine the mountain as a living thing, whispering back through the cold. Was it exhaustion or surrender? By 1980, official interest in the Yuba County Five had faded, but for the families, the pain never thawed. Ted's mother refused to sell her house, leaving Ted's room exactly as it was. Madruga's brother every winter would drive up the same road with flowers, and Gary's stepfather kept the porch light on for years, just in case. Every so often, new rumors reignited the wound. Hikers reported seeing a man matching Gary's description near Feather Falls in the early 80s, bearded, barefoot, muttering to himself about the snow. Another woman swore a man came to her gas station in Oroville late one night, hands trembling, asking if the others had made it. Police checked both stories, neither led anywhere. To this day, no official cause of death has ever been assigned to the Yuba County Five beyond misadventure. But even the investigators who wrote those words admitted, off record, that they didn't believe it. Something happened in those mountains. Something that frightened 5 grown men enough to abandon a car that could have saved them, to walk miles into freezing wilderness, to ignore food and heat and logic itself. Something turned a simple detour into a tragedy that still defies explanation. The story has lingered for almost 50 years, passed down, reimagined, retold, because it feels like a mirror held up to human fear. The fear of isolation, the fear of losing control, the fear that no matter how far we've come, the wilderness can still take us back. And somewhere, deep in the forest near Yuba County, where the snow falls thick and the air swallows sound, people still claim to hear footsteps at night, 5 pairs crunching softly through the trees, then 4, then 1. There are places in this world where time doesn't heal, where the air itself seems to hold onto a memory, unwilling to let it fade. The mountains above Yuba County are one such place. Even now, if you stand among those pines when the fog rolls in, you can feel it, a presence quiet but undeniable, the kind that makes you stop mid-step as if the earth beneath you remembers something you shouldn't. When searchers returned to the site years later, not for evidence but out of morbid curiosity, they found the forest changed. The cabin where Ted Wyer's body was discovered had collapsed into itself, its roof swallowed by moss and rot. But what struck them most was how untouched everything else remained. The forest had grown around the tragedy, not over it, as though it refused to erase what happened there. One of the men, a retired Forest Service worker named Don Peterson, claimed that when he entered what was left of the cabin, he heard something moving inside, a dragging sound followed by a soft, rhythmic breath. When he turned his flashlight toward it, there was nothing. But on the frost-covered window, he swore he saw 5 handprints. Over the years, people have tried to explain away every element of this story. They've called it panic, hypothermia, misjudgment. But anyone who's read the case closely, who's seen the maps, the photos, the autopsies, knows there's something far stranger at work, because no single theory fits. If they were simply lost, why drive 70 miles off route, past towns, past lights, into a road that led only into mountains? If their car had broken down, why wasn't there a single sign of struggle or distress? And if they panicked, why was the engine in perfect working order when it was found? In 1979, an investigator named Jack Hewitt Jr., the cousin of one of the victims, took it upon himself to retrace the men's final route. He followed the narrow dirt road past Oroville, through the winding switchbacks of the Sierra Nevada, until he reached the snow line. When he stepped out of his car, he described an unnatural stillness. No birds, no wind, just that strange, heavy quiet. He walked for nearly a mile before realizing he was standing near the same spot where the Mercury Montego had been found. There was no marker, no sign, only a rusted license plate half buried in the dirt. He later said that the moment he touched it, the air turned warm. Just for a second, Then everything went silent again. When he returned to his vehicle, he found that his car keys, which he'd left in the ignition, were gone. They were later found lying on the hood, perfectly centered. The tragedy of the Yuba County Five has never been fully solved, but the closer one looks, the clearer it becomes that this was never just a case of men lost in the woods. The path they took defies reason. The conditions of the bodies defy science. The timing of the events defies logic. What remains is a haunting portrait of confusion, survival, and something just beyond comprehension. A story that feels more like a ritual than a crime. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Some locals have a theory, one that's never appeared in official reports, but has passed quietly between families for generations. They say there's something ancient in those mountains, not a creature or ghost, but a presence, a kind of awareness that lives in the cold, in the silence, in the mist that rises from the snowdrifts at dawn. When the five men drove into the foothills that night, they might have awakened it, or simply been seen by it. And once seen, you don't escape. They say you can still feel it if you go there today, near Bucks Lake Road, where the trees lean just a little too close together. If you listen long enough, the wind carries voices, faint, distant, 5 of them. Some say they're calling for help. Others swear they're warning you to turn back. In the years since, hundreds have tried to solve the case. Podcasters, journalists, even paranormal investigators. But the forest doesn't give answers. It only gives echoes. An echo of confusion, an echo of fear, an echo of footsteps crunching through snow that always seem to stop just before you turn around. The Yuba County Five remain to this day a riddle carved into the cold heart of California's mountains. A reminder that even in the age of reason, the wild keeps its secrets. And sometimes, when the mist curls low across the pines and the night grows too quiet, you can still hear a car door slam in the distance. 5 voices laughing, one saying, "We'll be fine." Then the laughter fades, and the cold comes back. If you drive north out of Marysville at dusk, the landscape changes fast. The air turns colder, the trees grow taller, closing in until the headlights feel swallowed by the dark. And somewhere between the last gas station and the first shadow of the Sierra foothills, there's a road that doesn't appear on most maps. Locals call it the Old Oroville Trail. It looks ordinary enough, a cracked strip of asphalt, half consumed by roots and time. But those who've taken it swear the air feels different there, heavy, charged, like the forest is waiting for something to happen. This is the road the Yuba County Five took on the night of February 24th, 1978. And it's where everything we know about the case begins to fall apart. According to police, the men left Chico just before midnight after watching their basketball team win. They were in high spirits, joking, singing, celebrating. They bought snacks, soda, and set out for home, Yuba City, a straight 50-mile drive south. But they never took that road. Instead, they turned east, into the mountains. There's no clear reason for that turn, no detour, no wrong sign, just a sudden choice to leave the safety of the highway and climb into snow-covered wilderness at 1 in the morning. Why? None of them were known for impulsive behavior. They were routine-driven men, each with cognitive or emotional challenges that made structure and familiarity essential. They didn't drink, didn't experiment, didn't wander, and yet they went uphill. When investigators retraced their route, they realized something eerie. The road they took, the one their car was later found on, didn't connect to any logical path home. It wound deeper into the mountains, ending at a narrow turn where even seasoned locals avoided driving at night. Beyond that point, it disintegrated into a single-lane dirt path that disappeared beneath snowdrifts. No GPS, no lights, no reason, and yet they went on. Some believed they were following someone, a second vehicle maybe, seen only in flashes through the trees. Others suggested they were led there intentionally by someone who knew the area too well. An early clue surfaced when a man named Joseph Shones came forward. He'd been stuck in the snow that same night, about a mile from where the Montego was found. He said that sometime after midnight, as he sat trapped in his car, he saw headlights, first one set, then several. Coming up behind him, he called out for help. The lights stopped. Then, through the blur of exhaustion and cold, he saw 5 figures standing in the glow, one woman holding a baby. Moments later, the lights went out. The figures vanished into the woods. When rescuers questioned Shones, he swore he wasn't hallucinating, but he was later diagnosed with mild hypothermia, and the woman with a baby has never been explained, unless that detail wasn't literal. What if what he saw wasn't a woman at all, but a figure carrying something small, wrapped in cloth close to their chest? Maybe a box, maybe a radio, maybe an object they weren't supposed to have. Several years later, a retired deputy revealed something strange. A week before the disappearance, there had been reports of unmarked military convoys traveling through Oroville, carrying equipment toward the upper forest roads. Officially, they were part of a communication maintenance drill. Unofficially, locals said they were testing a new type of transmission system that interfered with civilian radios and caused compasses to spin. What if the men stumbled across one of those convoys? What if their car's direction, their fear, their strange behavior all stemmed from something they saw that night? No proof, no paperwork, just the silence of the mountains and a series of dead ends that seemed too perfectly aligned. To this day, the road where their car was found, Bucks Lake Road, has a reputation among locals. Phones die there without warning, car engines stall, even in summer, and hikers report hearing music drifting through the trees, faint, distorted, like a radio picking up a station that no longer exists. In the snow, every echo feels closer than it should be, every light farther than you can reach. Some say the road itself is cursed, that it appears only to those who shouldn't find it. Others insist it was built over something ancient, long before the county existed. But all agree on one thing: once you take that turn, you never come back the same. That night, the Yuba County Five followed a road that wasn't meant for them, a road that doesn't truly exist until someone steps on it. And when they did, the world as they knew it began to unravel. From that moment on, nothing that happened next could ever be explained by reason alone. If the Yuba County mystery had ended with the car, it might have been written off as a tragic accident. But what happened next, what witnesses claimed they saw in the woods that night, turned a local disappearance into one of the most chilling unsolved cases in modern American history. It began with a single vision: a woman carrying a baby. But as investigators dug deeper, the truth became far stranger. February 24th, 1978, 11:47 p.m., Joseph Shones' car slides into a snowbank on Bucks Lake Road. He's alone, miles from help, his engine running for heat. The blizzard outside swallows all sound. Around 12:30 a.m., he feels his chest tighten, a heart attack, mild but terrifying. Barely conscious, he looks up through his fogged windshield and sees headlights cutting through the storm. He honks, he shouts, and then he sees them. 5 figures, silhouettes framed in white. 4 men. One smaller shape, and one unmistakably a woman holding a bundle close to her chest. He calls for help again. They stop. Briefly, he can hear them whispering. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they turn and vanish into the tree line. When Shones is found the next morning, his car nearly buried in snow, he tells the story to police. At first, they assume it's a delusion brought on by exhaustion. But when the missing Yuba County Five's car is discovered less than a mile from that exact spot, the details start to feel too precise to ignore. For years, investigators debated what Shones had actually seen. If those were the missing men, who was the woman? And what was she carrying? Theories spread fast. Some said it was a local resident, perhaps part of a search party, or a hiker who'd lost her way. But the timeline didn't fit. There was no record of anyone else on the mountain that night. Others believed she wasn't real at all, that the woman was a kind of psychic residue, a manifestation of the mountain itself, appearing only in moments of crisis. Shones' description was too vivid for imagination. Pale face, dark coat, the bundle swaying gently in her arms. But a few researchers, especially those who studied the area's Cold War history, thought there was a darker explanation. In the 1970s, several government research sites operated secretly across Northern California, studying radio frequencies, radar interference, and early satellite communications. Some of these projects used experimental transmitters that emitted low-frequency electromagnetic waves capable of disorienting animals and possibly humans. One declassified report from 1976, just 2 years before the disappearance, warned that exposure to certain frequencies could induce hallucinatory episodes in test subjects under extreme conditions. Now imagine 5 men driving late at night through freezing fog, their car moving past one of those transmitters, their minds confused, their senses warped, perhaps seeing something that wasn't there, or worse, seeing something that was. And what if the woman with the baby wasn't human at all, but a projection, a side effect, or a deliberate distraction? When the snow melted, a search team combed the area where Shones claimed to have seen her. There were no footprints, no clothing fibers, no sign of any child. But they did find something strange. Half buried near the roadside was a scrap of fabric, coarse and dark, like the edge of a heavy cloak. It was unlike anything the 5 men wore, or any local clothing reported missing that year. Tests showed traces of metallic dust and something else, a compound consistent with protective gear used in electronic testing labs. The discovery was quietly logged, photographed, and lost. When journalists later requested it, the evidence had gone missing. In local lore, the woman with the baby became something else entirely. Some said she was a spirit, leading the lost toward the forest's heart. Others believed she was an omen, appearing before anyone who would die in those mountains. But a few, including one of the retired detectives, held to a different theory, that what Shones saw wasn't a woman at all. It was Gary Mathias, the missing 5th man, wrapped in a stolen coat, clutching a bundle of supplies, his mind slipping into madness. He may have tried to find help and failed, or he may have led the others deeper, chasing something he thought he saw. Either way, the woman with the baby was real, just not in the way anyone expected. To this day, the mystery endures. Every few winters, someone driving the same road reports seeing the same thing: a flash of headlights, a cluster of figures, a woman crossing the road with a child in her arms, only to disappear into the trees when you blink. And always near the same curve where the Yuba County 5 vanished. By the time spring crept into the Sierra Nevada, most of the snow had melted, revealing secrets the mountain had kept buried for months. 4 bodies frozen, starved, and 1 man still missing. His name was Gary Mathias, the man who didn't belong. Gary was different from the others, not in cruelty but in chemistry. He had served in the U.S. Army, stationed in Germany, where he'd developed a dependency on psychiatric medication after a breakdown. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but those who knew him said he was functional, kind, loyal, a young man rebuilding his life with the help of his friends from the Gateway Gators basketball team. And then, on that cold February night, He vanished with them into the snow. 4 would be found. Gary would not. No trace of him, not his body, not his clothing, not his remains, was ever recovered. At first, the investigators assumed he had perished like the others, that perhaps after days of starvation and disorientation, he wandered off, fell into a ravine, and disappeared beneath the melting snow. But when the area was searched again and again, year after year, something didn't fit. Gary's shoes were found inside the Forest Service trailer near the bodies of the others, but his feet were gone. Someone had taken them off, perhaps to make a trade, or to continue walking through the snow barefoot. And next to the shoes, in the half-frozen dust, lay a single Army-issued flashlight, the kind only Gary owned. The batteries were dead, but the switch was on. He'd gone somewhere. But where? As the weeks went on, theories multiplied like shadows. One idea: Gary had survived, that he had left the mountains injured but alive, walking for days until he reached civilization. He might have boarded a truck, changed his name, started again. It sounded impossible, but not to those who knew him. Gary was resourceful, strong, and if anyone among the 5 could endure, it was him. In the decades since, there have been hundreds of alleged sightings. A man matching Gary's description seen at truck stops, shelters, and in remote parts of Oregon. A few even reported that he avoided police as if afraid to be found. But there was one witness, a retired ranger, whose account changed everything. In 1985, 7 years after the disappearance, the ranger was hiking near the Plumas National Forest, just east of where the trailer had been found. As dusk fell, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. A man, barefoot, thin, wrapped in a torn military jacket. Watching him, when the ranger called out, the man turned and vanished into the pines. At the spot where he'd stood, there was a small pile of bones picked clean by scavengers and something else. A dog tag, rusty, almost unreadable, but the letters carved on the back were faintly visible. Matthias Gary, U.S. Army. The tag was collected, photographed, and sent to local law enforcement, but when reporters requested it years later, the document had vanished from evidence. The case marked inconclusive. There's another story, one less known, whispered by the locals who live near the Feather River Canyon. They tell of a thin man who came down from the hills one summer night in 1979. Wild-eyed, barefoot, his clothes tattered. He begged for food, then vanished back into the woods before dawn. When asked his name, the only word he said was Gary. Police searched, but no trace of him was ever found. Some think it was a coincidence. Others believe it was him, still wandering, still alive, still lost in a world that had already written him dead. Then there's the other theory, the one that sits in the cold space between reality and fear, that Gary Matthias didn't escape that night. He was taken. Those who study the case point to the strange military presence in the surrounding region, the restricted sites near Oroville, the radar testing facilities, the unexplained lights that several locals reported in the sky that same night. If Gary had witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see, then perhaps his disappearance wasn't an accident at all. Perhaps the others died trying to flee from something real, and Gary was silenced, or worse, kept alive. One investigator, now in his 80s, once said off record, "You don't lose 5 grown men in a snowstorm and find 4 starved to death, miles from a stocked trailer unless they were running from something." The question he could never answer was simple: what were they running from? In the official reports, Gary Matthias remains missing to this day, but every few years when the wind howls down the canyons of Yuba County, hikers swear they see footprints in the frost, bare feet, human, heading deeper into the trees. In the end, all that remained were echoes, scattered through police reports, half-burned newspaper clippings, and the restless murmurs of a town that never found peace. 5 young men had driven into the mountains that February night. 4 were found. 1 was not. And what happened in the space between, in the frost, the silence, and the dark, became a riddle that refuses to die. By early summer of 1978, the case was declared closed. Exposure, the coroner said. Disorientation, the investigators added. A tragic accident. But to anyone who's seen the files, the photographs, the paths they walked, the timeline that breaks its own logic, it feels like something more. Because between the official lines, there are moments that don't belong. Footprints that lead uphill, not down. Canned food untouched beside a stocked stove. A broken window in the trailer no animal could reach. And of course, the missing man who left his shoes behind but somehow kept walking. The mothers of the 5 would gather each spring in Marysville, lighting candles along the Feather River. One of them, Ted Wyer's mother, once said in an interview, her voice trembling, "It wasn't the cold that took them, something else kept them there." Another, Gary's mother, never gave up hope. For years, she left her porch light on, convinced that one day he would return, that the son she'd lost to the mountains would find his way back from whatever shadow world had claimed him. The light burned every night until the day she passed, and yet the story never stayed buried. Rangers who patrol the Sierra Nevada still talk about strange signals, bursts of static on old emergency channels long after the equipment should be dead. When played back, they sound almost human, a voice breaking through the interference. Sometimes it's just a name, sometimes it's laughter, and sometimes a whisper too low to make out. But once, only once, a ranger claimed to have heard a clear phrase come through. The logbook entry was dated February 24th, 1999. The note read, "Transmission on Channel 4B, male voice. Sounds distressed. Says, we didn't mean to go this far." No recording was ever found. The log disappeared from archives soon after. Decades later, hikers still stumble upon strange things in the woods north of Oroville. A torn letter in a plastic sleeve, a rusted keychain with the initials GM, an old flashlight that flickers weakly when turned on, even after all these years. And sometimes, deep at night, truckers crossing the Feather River Bridge see movement on the shoulder, 5 shapes in the snow, standing still, as if waiting for someone to come back. By the time anyone stops, they're gone. There are those who say the Yuba County 5 were victims of panic and the elements, that the human mind, when trapped by fear, will destroy itself faster than any storm. But others believe their story is a map, one that points to something buried beneath those mountains, something that watches and waits and chooses when to let itself be seen. And maybe that's why no one has ever solved it, because what happened up there wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be remembered. The files are closed now, yellowed with age. The names, Madruga, Sterling, Hewitt, Wyer, and Matthias, carved into stone markers scattered across California. But when the wind moves through the pines of Plumas Forest, it carries a faint echo, a heartbeat of their laughter, their friendship, their confusion, and the terror of that final night. 5 men went into the snow. Only 4 came back, and one still walks between the worlds, barefoot and unseen, his flashlight always on, his voice caught forever between static and silence. Somewhere out there, the mountain remembers. And when the fog rolls in and the night grows too quiet, if you listen closely, you might just hear it whisper, "We didn't mean to go this far." Dedicated to the Yuba County 5, may the truth one day find its way home.